Hi, I'm Jeremiah from Life Counselling. Today we're going to talk about one of the roots of a very important issue called anxiety. But before we continue with that, I want to make sure that you click like and subscribe right now and then get back to watching this video. All right, we're going to talk about one of the roots of anxiety. Now, not necessarily the root of anxiety, although in my biased opinion, it is the root issue. But there are different roots of anxiety. One of them in particular that I'm not going to talk about today is what is known as the chemical effect of anxiety. We are a human being with different chemicals running through our body, different things, happening that cause anxiety to happen. But that's actually not the root I'm going to talk about, okay? One of the roots I'm going to talk about is in part what I would call a physiological component, where combined with the mind, combined with the chemical component, and this root issue that can create as a long-term effect an outcome of what is known as anxiety. Well, as I've just said, if anxiety is an outcome, then that means there has to be something before. Now, like I just said, there can be a chemical component involved, which is where individuals like your doctor, a psychiatrist, all right, that specializes in the chemical side of things when we're dealing with things like anxiety are very important to visit if that's something that you need support with in order to maintain your emotional and mental health. But what I want to talk about today is more in what is traditionally called the soul realm, okay? Mind, will, and emotion. And I'm going to specifically go down to the root issue of emotion. And it's a primary emotion, which is interesting, all right? And that'll be maybe for a different video we'll talk about as well. Let's go back to what I was saying again. This is like deja vu, right? Okay, if anxiety is an outcome, maybe with or not including a chemical side of things, what is the root cause of anxiety? Well, I would suggest that root cause is actually fear. Fear as an outcome, not resolved. In other words, if I have fear of something or fear of some things, the outcome can actually lead to an end result of anxiety. Oh, well, what's anxiety? Well, as many of us know, it could be many different things. Maybe it's fear of being with people, being in public, fear of, moving forward. Kind of the way I like to describe it is if depression, which is another topic, depression kind of prevents us from getting up to get our day started. Anxiety kind of prevents us from moving forward into our day. It helps to prevent, I want to get momentum going. I want to do something, but there's no way I'm going to do it. Well, the root of that, in my opinion, is fear. Fear is a very powerful component. What is fear, however? Well, fear is many different definitions, actually, all right? But the one thing that I like to focus when we're talking about fear, and specifically fear as a primary emotion, okay, is that fear as a primary emotion is very neutral. In other words, fear is hardwired biologically in us, all right? You can't, as the old camp song goes, you can't go around it, you can't go under it, you can't go over it, you gotta go through with it. Well, that's interesting because I just said anxiety is what prevents us from moving forward within our day, within our life, okay? So when we take the concept of fear, I want to introduce a concept again that fear is actually a neutral. It's not about good, bad, right, wrong. I like to kind of narrow it in a little bit and talk about healthy versus unhealthy fear, okay? And so that's what our next video is going to talk about, the primary root emotion of fear, so we can understand it more effectively. All right, so you're going to have to make sure that you stay tuned and watch that next video on fear, so that way you can learn what the root cause and how to maybe deal with some of this root cause of the primary emotion known as fear that unresolved leads to an outcome of anxiety. Yee, not a good thing. And then, of course, from there, we've got to figure out how can we navigate through this thing called anxiety and deal with it and have some ways to be able to move forward in our life. All right. Great seeing you wherever you are at today. I hope you have a great rest of wherever you're at.